Hello and welcome to the Book Show on Diversity Television. I'm Ava Colopy, a writer of fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. My work often focuses on the intersection of social issues and family dramas. We are in Ireland today, the land of literature, poetry, and academia. And also, fittingly for the books I've picked out today to talk to you about, it is a pretty green place where people are very focused on trying to use cleaner sources of energy. So, today I'm going to talk to you about possibly, it has been said, it is one of the most important issues of our era, if not the most important issue, environmentalism, which primarily means talking about energy and human consumption of energy. So our number one source of pollution and also of human advancement is energy and energy use. To dig into this issue, I'm going to talk about 7 different books today. So strap in and stay with me on this because it's very important to dig into this issue, because usually when people talk about it, they are only just scratching the surface, whether they realize it or not. And I would say some elected officials and people working in nonprofit organizations know they are only scratching the surface, and what they're talking about is not going to make any difference. So let's get into this. So we'll start digging into this issue by looking at a book that an environmentalist such as myself would normally not even look at, and I will explain soon how I even got into looking at this. This is a book called $1 Trillion Baby: How Norway Beat the Oil Giants and Won a Lasting Fortune by Paul Cleary. Now, why would I be reading this when I'm an environmentalist? And why should you read it if you were an environmentalist? Because if you don't understand the oil and gas industry and the energy sector in general, you're not going to ever be able to be truly effective in replacing dirty energy sources. So I will illustrate this to begin with by going through the description of the book, which will make my point better than any single excerpt from the book. So, for most of its history, the remote and near Arctic nation of Norway has eked out a marginal existence from fishing, forestry, and shipping. That is, until Christmas Eve 1969, when oil was discovered off its southern coast. Rather than squandering the profits, as the UK did with its North Sea oil, when the revenue began flowing, Norway put in place the most robust and visionary framework for extracting maximum benefit from non-renewable resources found anywhere in the world. Less than 20 years after the country began investing in what is now called the Government Pension Fund, Norway has the largest sovereign wealth in the world, with assets of US $870 billion. What's more, the fund is on track to hit the US $1 trillion mark by 2020. So this book was written 4 years ago. Not only is every Norwegian now a crone millionaire and enjoying the highest standard of living in the world, they will be able to hand down this endowment to their children and grandchildren. Norway's savings strategy means that it has taken a non-renewable resource and turned it into a financial asset that can last long after the oil wealth has been completely exhausted. This is the story of how they did it. So what do we see here? As from a sort of an environmentalist perspective, it is the challenge. How do you make alternative clean sources of energy as financially beneficial as this to thousands or millions of people in a country? I'm 100% behind cleaner energy sources and being an environmentalist, but I'm also a practical person. I am a realist as a person. So most politicians and activists that talk about clean energy don't know anything about the science or the economics of energy and the energy sector. Young people, like the lovely Swedish activist Greta Thunberg, mean well, but are often getting sold empty campaign slogans, and if young people like Ms. Thunberg and her very nice supporters really want to have a practical impact with this issue in the real world, what they need to do is actually go to school and study the sciences and business and economics. Because talking about how much you hate dirty energy is basically irrelevant until you figure out some way to replace it. And ways that we're looking at to replace it now, for example, solar energy, which looks like a great savior, and we have tons of solar energy coming down on the planet now. However, the issue with that is that we do not have the battery technology to store this energy or store it and transport it over very long distances. So that we have so much solar energy coming down on the planet is largely irrelevant in terms of replacing our oil and gas consumption until we can actually store it. How can we improve this battery technology? People need to go to university, study the sciences, and figure that out. Now, we could have, say, more government and nonprofit organization investment into that sort of education and that sort of research, and that would be very useful. But marching through the streets to say, stop using so much oil and coal is largely pointless if we do not have some way to replace that energy consumption. And right now, we don't have a way to actually replace it. And there's no way you can claim that we do if you don't even know how many units of energy your country is using, how many units of that energy is coming from oil and gas, how many units is coming from coal, and how few units are coming from renewable resources. Now you could say part of that is, oh, we need to build more solar panels and so forth, but that's tip of the iceberg right there. We need better technology for actually harnessing and storing this energy. It isn't just a matter of building more solar panels or wind turbines at this point. So if young environmentalists really want to have an effect on this issue, and I am most certainly hoping that they do and that we do crack this, and I think with human ingenuity the way it is, we can. We just need to put that investment into it and be smart about this instead of just shouting around a bunch of empty campaign slogans or listening to politicians making empty promises. Oh, we're the country who's made the biggest promise to do such and such by such and such. That is not a practical plan with actual logistics figured out. And that's what you need to look for with these people. So, how I got into looking at this is actually that when I went back to university to get an MBA, because of my work schedule, I could only do certain classes that were in my schedule. And so one of the mandatory classes was a class about the oil and gas industry, taught by a professional from that industry. So I naturally, as sort of an environmentalist sort of person, I assumed I would hate this class and that I would not be fond of the professor either. But of course, I did the correct thing and shut my mouth, went to class, didn't give any trouble, and was there to just, do the coursework and finish the class and did not give any trouble, which is exactly what was on my mind to do. But I was very surprised when I got there that I actually really enjoyed the class. It was actually very engaging, it was very interesting, and it was the most important class that I have ever taken in my life in regards to being an environmentalist. Because it was more important than even when I took the class sustainable business. It was sustainable business I took as an elective in first year of my undergrad, and that was a very good class, but this one was actually better from an environmentalist point of view. So, if you go around and you're around people who want sustainable business and so forth, you'll be preaching to the choir, they'll be preaching to you, and nothing much is happening. And you're not learning what you really need to, which the main first big priority here is energy. So I'm going to talk about some books that can get you into this subject and help you to really know something about it instead of just having these kind of empty campaign promises and empty nonprofit organization slogans. So a really good one to start you into this subject is Energy, A Human History by Pulitzer-prize winning author Richard Rhodes. Now he gets into the whole history of really human advancement and the advancement of our civilization and how with each new development in energy technology, we were able to have a more advanced society. He shows the importance of the energy. He does also talk about a lot of times where there was environmental pollution and people got very sick from it or even died from it. So he does get into that. And he's not really kind of being for or against an industry. He's just giving you the information, which is very good. So I will read you from the description. Human beings have engaged the promise of drawing life from the material world since the beginning of time. That's sort of all mining operations and so forth. Each invention, each discovery, each adaptation brought further challenges in its wake, And through such continuing transformations, we arrived at where we are today. In his singular style, Rhodes details how this half-forgotten knowledge from our history can inform our way. Now, some of it does get into the science of things, and if you're someone who's not from a science background, you may think that would be intimidating, but he explains it in a good way, and it's not really too complicated for even just a lay person to understand. It's a really good way to start understanding some of the logistics of energy consumption and what it actually takes to keep a civilization going. Because that's sort of the actual numbers are something that environmental groups generally don't talk about for a number of reasons. Another really good book for getting into this if you're an environmentalist is Global Oil and Gas Industry Management, Strategy and Finance by Andrew Inkpen and Michael H. Moffett. Now, why should an environmentalist read this book? Because it will tell you about this industry. And then it gets you thinking about other things that you might not have before, such as if you wanted to go into a country that uses a lot of oil, what are the geopolitical factors that might make the government not want you to switch them over to renewable energy? This is the kind of thing you need to think about. It's not just, should we do it, shouldn't we do it? What are the politics of doing it? What are the actual logistics? What would be the logistics of actually making human civilization around the world switch over to renewable energy? Which would be a great thing. I'm all for it, but it's never going to happen if we don't come up with a real plan that focuses on these logistics, these cold hard facts. So from the first chapter I will read, the oil and gas industry is one of the largest, most complex and important global industries. The industry touches everyone's lives with products such as transportation, heating, and electricity fuels, asphalt, lubricants, propane, thousands of petrochemical products, from carpets to eyeglasses to clothing. Isn't even just as an energy source, it's all these other things. The industry impacts national security, elections, geopolitics, and international conflicts. The prices of crude oil and natural gas are probably the two most closely watched commodity prices in the global economy. In recent years, the industry has seen many tumultuous events, including the continuing efforts from oil-producing countries like Kazakhstan, Russia, and Venezuela to exert greater control over their resources, major technical advances in deepwater drilling and shale gas, Chinese firms acquiring exploration rights at record-high prices, ongoing strife in Sudan, Nigeria, and Chad, all in Africa if you don't know, and the other oil-exporting nations' continued heated discussion about global warming and non-hydrocarbon sources of energy, and huge movements up and down in crude prices. All of this comes amid predictions that the global demand for energy will increase by 30 to 40% by 2030. Now, this book was written in 2011, so that's something to consider. A little bit about the background and history of oil and gas. When Colonel Edwin Drake struck oil in northwestern Pennsylvania in the United States in 1859, the first phase of the oil industry began. John D. Rockefeller emerged in those early days as a pioneer in industrial organization. When Rockefeller combined Standard Oil and 39 affiliated companies to create Standard Oil Trust in 1882, his goal was not to form a monopoly because these companies already controlled 90% of the kerosene market. His real goal was the economy of scale, which was achieved by combining all the refining operations under a single management structure. In doing so, Rockefeller set the stage for what historian Alfred Chandler called the dynamic logic of growth and competition that drives modern capitalism. Another very useful reference in this, Oil 101 by Morgan Downey. Now this has a lot of numbers, a lot of facts, statistics, that sort of thing. Handy graphs and charts to understand the energy industry much better, because the oil and gas industry is part of the energy industry, the energy sector in general. So that can be another very useful tool in educating yourself on the subject. Now, moving away from books about dirty energy, here's another book that I could recommend to you. It is Tomorrow's Energy, Hydrogen Fuel Cells and the Prospects for Cleaner Planet by Peter Hoffmann. Now, this is very useful because, again, it gets into more the technical side of things. If we're going to get rid of dirty energies, what are we going to replace them with? This book helps to start giving you some ideas about that. And that is an excellent area to look into because, for one thing, we talk a lot about solar and wind, but what about other things that we're maybe not thinking of, like hydrogen, new technologies? Really think creatively about it, and then human ingenuity can come up with, over time, those solutions that we need. So getting back to renewable energies that we're more familiar with, here's an interesting book, Superpower. One man's quest to transform American energy, meaning U.S. American anyway, as opposed to the other Americans. So it's by senior energy reporter for the Wall Street Journal, Russell Gold. This is very useful because it gets into the logistics of how you do things like put in massive wind farms to get wind turbines to generate that energy. Because if you hear anyone saying, oh, or if you catch yourself saying something like, oh, we should just put in massive wind farms. There is no just putting in a massive wind farm. There are the logistics of it. Where are you going to find the land to do that? Are people going to be willing to let you use the space? Do they want money for that? Or are they going to give that for free to ultimately get a portion of the proceeds of the energy that's generated? Where are you going to get the metal to build these turbines, truck all that into the location, get the engineers and other workers to build all of this, to design it and to build it? This gets into some of the logistics of how you actually put in giant wind farms. Because as I just said, there is no, oh, just put in a giant wind farm or a giant solar power generating space. There is no such thing. There is the logistics of doing it and getting into the cold hard facts of how you would do this and how you would finance a massive project. It is possible. This book is about not a hypothetical wind farm, but about wind farms that actually exist and were put in. But he gets into the story of how, crucially important for anyone who wants to support cleaner energy sources, whether you're an environmentalist or just, an opportunist who wants to make a lot of money, because there's a lot of money to be had in renewable energy going forward. So that is another very good book to look at. The last one I'm going to recommend today will be extremely controversial to anyone who is an environmentalist, which is extremely important, because you're better off if we bring you out of that comfort zone where you're preaching to the choir and they're preaching to you. So this is a book called Inconvenient Facts: The Science That Al Gore Doesn't Want You to Know by Gregory Wrightstone. This is a man who does not believe in global warming, doesn't care about renewable energy sources, is not interested in that. He spends the book trying to convince you that all of that is nonsense. So why would I recommend you read this book if you are an environmentalist? Because again, it's not preaching to the choir. And as my parents always said, you need to understand the other person's point of view if you're going to argue and debate with them. Now, by argue, I don't mean fight. I mean it's much better if you have a conversation with people who have a different opinion than you. So if you're just fighting, they're not changing your mind, you're not changing theirs, and we're not making any progress. Now, I'm talking about having a conversation. So if you want to have this conversation, and of course, in the end, ultimately convince them that you are right, which is what most people do, they listen to respond, not to actually take in the information. But anyway, you need to understand where they're getting their ideas, where they're getting their opinions, and when they talk about science, what science they're talking about that's obviously different than the science you're talking about. So for example, here in his book, he has this little chart right here, this little graph. Carbon dioxide, 600 million years of data. According to this, the CO2 concentration in parts per million was far, far higher in this Cambrian period than right here in the Tertiary Quaternary. That is a mouthful. So it's charting this parts per million, and according to this, it is drastically less now than it used to be. Now, because I don't have a background in science, I don't know if that's accurate. But when I read Al Gore's book, I didn't know if any of that was accurate either. Now, he does criticize Al Gore. I'm not going to get into a conversation about Al Gore or his book for various reasons. It's not an argument that's worth my time. But the point is, you need to understand where other people are getting their ideas and what they consider to be facts and science so that you can understand their point of view. And if this is scientifically inaccurate, then you need to actually delve into it and say, well, I checked out this book that you may have read, and this may be where you're getting your facts, and here's what I found out when I looked into it, and actually be willing to consider what they have to say and where they're getting their views. So if you want to have an impact on the issue of environmentalism, I'm sorry to tell you, it's going to be hard work, and it starts with just a simple introduction to this sort of thing. Energy sector, the history of energy, alternative sources of energy, and what other people think is true and where they get their opinions. And I hope that young people will delve into that and go on to a university and get whatever, maybe even try to get the government or nonprofit groups to give those grants to get that education, to develop those new technologies to replace the current dirty technologies. But until you've done the research here, you're just not going to be able to have an impact. Having protests, having catchy campaign slogans, throwing eggs at your government officials is not going to make any real difference in the issue of environmentalism. What is getting into the logistics, the actual facts of it, and the science of it. And I definitely hope that young people coming up today will do that and will make that difference and be that change. Human ingenuity has solved a multitude of problems, albeit it's caused a lot of other ones, but it's solved a lot of problems, and I don't think that we should despair and act like we are at some hopeless point. We just need to think logically about it and be very creative, but also very practical and get into the logistics of it, and then there is definitely all kinds of hope. So thank you for watching the book show on Diversity Television, and I hope you'll join us next time for more books and more opinions. And I'm not quite sure yet how this is going to be put maybe online or on a TV network. That hasn't been discussed yet. With myself, which is fine. But if there's anywhere where you can put comments or anything, or we can continue this discussion online or anything like that, by all means, we would definitely invite that. I would invite it, and I'm sure everyone working on the network would absolutely invite that kind of debate, that discussion, that opinion, as long as it's not kind of trolling and being angry, but it's respectful and we're having a conversation and you can bring in your ideas and we can have that back and forth. And if anyone from a scientific background wants to weigh in on this, that would be great, because like I said, I don't have that scientific background to really get into that. But if anyone out there does and watches this and wants to put your opinion out there, wherever there's a place to put in comments or anything like that, we'd be all for that and absolutely appreciate the interaction. And we need to have that conversation. Just kind of humanity in general, we need to have conversations. So thank you for watching the book show on Diversity Television, and I do hope you will join us next time. You are more than welcome to. I'm Ava Colopy here in Ireland. And to all our viewers out there, I hope you find what you're looking for.